once again, grade 12 Valenzuelanos. Welcome to the second live stream session for 21st century literature from the Philippines and from the world. I am Jasper Angeles and I will be your live stream teacher. Before we begin, make sure that you have with you your learning packets, your notebook, and your ballpen. Please take down notes during our live stream sessions. To start our lesson, let us do this activity. It's called Put a Finger Down. Here, all you need to do is to put your hands like this, put up your hands like this, and I will be giving statements. You need to put a finger down if you're guilty of those statements. Alright? But there's another element I've added. I have here two pictures. Let's see the first picture. Alright, take note of this picture, huh? The statements I'm going to give will be based on this picture and on the picture later. Okay? Are you ready? Alright, everyone, please secure the position of your phones first. I know that everyone is using his or her phone or holding his or her phone right now. So please make sure that it doesn't drop. Okay, let's start. Put your hands up. Okay? Put the finger down if you think that in the picture that you've seen a while ago, there were 3 logs. Put the finger down if you saw 4 logs. Put the finger down if you believe that neither of them is correct. Put the finger down if you think that both of them are actually correct. Alright, how many fingers were left so far? Alright, let's proceed with the next picture. Alright, so maintain those hands. In this picture, we have the word essay. Let's start. Put a finger down if you think that essay writing is a difficult task. Put a finger down if you have no idea how to write an essay. Put a finger down if you know that an essay needs a thesis statement. Alright, how many fingers were left? Comment on the comment section now. Write your answer on the comment box. But while you're doing that, let's see the first picture again. Who do you think is correct? The person on your left or the person on your right? Okay, comment your answers on the comment box. Is it the person on the left or the person on the right? I see somebody saying that it's the person on the left, the one, others say that it's the person on the right, but why would others say that both of them are actually correct? We often say that everyone is entitled to his opinion. This is because we come from various perspectives. Looking again at the picture, the man on your left would say that he sees that there are 4 logs because he is looking from the left side. The other man on the other side would say he sees 3 logs simply because he's looking from the other side. Just like in this picture, we look at literature using various perspectives. When we read literary pieces, we understand them using a perspective. What are some of the words similar to perspective? We have point of view, position, and attitude. I hope this would help to better understand this concept. Its formal meaning would be a way of regarding something, a way of understanding a literary piece in the context of literature. Note that there is no such thing as wrong perspective. When we interpret the literary piece, what becomes wrong would be our understanding of some of the words or of the narratives that we read. This contributes to a wrong interpretation of the text, not the perspective used by the writer or by the reader. Also, each perspective, which we will call from now on as an approach, gives an insight about the literary text we read. Know that unlike in junior high school, where you generally interpret literary pieces using your understanding of the literary elements such as, but not limited to, figures of speech, plot, and theme, the ones we're talking about here is the understanding of literature based on certain ideas. To better understand this thought, let us read and interpret this poem. It is entitled Alamat ng Pulang Bigas by Christian J. Salazar. Let's read it. Tubig na pandilig nila'y luhang lamig, di matabla ng dasal ang tuyong bukid. Nanalangin ng dagdag kita't ginhawa, sagot ng Diyos ng lupa, ulang tingga. To understand the message of the poem, or what we call as the theme, we will use the perspective you frequently use in junior high school, the formalist or textual approach. In this approach, we look at the elements of the poem such as the persona, addressee, subject of the poem, and symbols among others. We do not add or give meaning to our experiences nor our idea of other context in our interpretation of a literary piece analyzed using a formalist approach. So let us begin. To identify the theme of the poem, let us begin with the subject of the poem. Looking for the subject, we see the pronoun nila or they in English. This pronoun is related by the persona with people who do the watering and tending of the field, which is obviously used to plant rice. Obviously, the word nila here referred to farmers. This thought is supported by the words pulang bigas, tubig na pandilig, and bukid. Aside from these rice farmers, the persona talks of another being in the poem, Diyos ng lupa. Who is the God of land mentioned here? Can you please comment your answers to this? Who do you think is the God of land mentioned in the poem? If your answer is landowners, you're correct. Looking at the context of the poem wherein we have farmers and a field, we are sure that these gods refer to the landowners. What about the farmers? How did the persona characterize or describe the farmers in the poem? Let us look at the metaphors used. One of the images we saw in the poem is luhang lamig or cold tears as water for rice. Shedding tears is not always a manifestation of misery, everyone, but looking at the response of another being, which was referred to as gods of the land, we would understand that these tears are not of joy. The gods of the land, which is a metaphor to the landowners, had this response, ulang tingga. Though we are yet to be sure of the role of this item in the response of the landowners, knowing the needs of the farmers that are enumerated or were enumerated in the poem, like compensation and relief, this response is absolutely in contrast with what the farmers need. The combination of the farmer situation and the response of the landowners here is an indication that the poem is all about the sufferings experienced by farmers and the indifference of their landowners to their situation. Note that this is only a formalist or textual way of reading this poem. Using other critical approaches like historical biographical approach, we would see another way of interpreting the text. When you use this approach, you must look for the connection between the situation presented in the text and the life, environments, and experiences of its author during the writing of that literary piece. The writer Christian J. Salazar is a current student of pamantasan ng lungsod ng Valenzuela and is specializing in Filipino education. Actually, this poem was a requirement that he submitted in one of his classes. It was even featured in PhilStar for obtaining thousands of reactions in Facebook and Twitter. What do you think are the realities saw by Mr. Salazar about our farmers? Let me help you with that. Let us look at some of the news reports about our farmers or about them. Let us start with these news bits about farmers forced to agree with loans in order to save their only means to make a living. Here, we see that with the implementation of the Rice Liberation Law, these farmers face competition with imported rice. As you all know, competition forces competitors to cut on their prices on the market. This situation resulted in the plummeting palay prices, which truly hampered the income of these farmers. This is also discussed in the article entitled The Tragedy of the Filipino Farmers by Zolo de Jaresco III. Using this article, we can definitely understand who are the people meant by the author in the word gods of the land. Aside from the landowners, we can say that they also refer to the oligarchs who pretend to help these farmers but are actually putting them in a very tight situation. Now, let's look back at the poem and try to dig deeper. If in the formalist perspective, we know that the subject of the poem are farmers and that they're suffering using historical biographical approach, that allows us to interpret the text based on the realities observed by the author. We can see that these farmers are victims of both the economy and the god of the land we may either refer to as opportunistic oligarchs or the government who failed to consider the farmers in passing a law about rice importation. Furthermore, we see that the poem reflects the needs of the farmers for irrigation for dry land, right compensation, and relief, which were responded with ulang tingga, an image that we may consider as counterproductive response using the formalist perspective. Using historical biographical perspective, on the other hand, we may refer to these falling pieces of metal to barrels of gun bullets. You see, class, in November 16, 2004, a farmers' strike in Hacienda Luisita, which calls for an increase in weekly wage, worker benefits, and a true commitment to land reform, ended as a massacre of 7 people, including 2 children, who were not spared by the tear gas thrown by the police and army dispersal groups. 133 people were arrested and 121 were injured. To borrow the words of laborstart.com, all they wanted is to own a piece of land to till for a living. What they got was a piece of mound to lay on their bodies to rest till eternity. You see, the line, sagot ng Diyos ng lupa ulang tingga, is more than a group of words about a counterproductive response. Using historical biographical approach, we see a haunting story of farmers who were killed because of their desire for a better life. With all the things we have said about the poem, one thing is clear. Perspectives really matter in interpretation. Using historical biographical approach, we saw the connection of the literary subject to the writer's milieu. This is different when the formalist or the textual perspective is used in the situation of understanding the literary text or the literary subject. Here we elaborate, the subject or the poem based on the literary elements we see in the literary piece. Note, however, that using a perspective in interpreting literature is a messy task. You need to organize your thoughts so you may clearly convey the message you have uncovered from the literary piece. This is where essay writing comes into the picture. The idea that popped out of your mind must be reflected on a written material, or in this case, on an essay. Remember, I asked you about your knowledge of your essay a while ago? Don't worry if you have put down a lot of fingers a while ago, because we will try our best to understand the different approaches to literature and the ways in order to put down your ideas in writing. To begin our discussion, let us look at our objectives for today. Number 1, identify and apply the critical approaches in producing critical analysis of literary texts. Number 2, understand the role of the different parts of the essay to convey a clear message. And lastly, write a close analysis and critical interpretation of a literary text. My dear students, close analysis and critical interpretation is something beyond reading for facts or pieces of information. Remember a while ago or we did not only look for the subject of the poem and the figures of speech. We use these pieces of information to develop an idea about the text and eventually uncover its theme. Doing this would require higher order thinking skills, analysis, and synthesis to be exact. Again, reading critically means determining ways of thinking about the text, not just citing the facts. As a critical reader, we focus not only what the text says, but also on the purpose why this text was written. Before we discuss how a critical essay is written, let us first look at the approaches that we may use to understand the literary texts. Let us begin with historical biographical approach. Again, this approach is used to understand the literary piece using the life, environment, and experiences of the author. Basically, we make sense of the text by using the events in the life of the author. Analyzing the story Sinigang by Marie Aubrey Villaseran using historical biographical approach would make us realize the pressing social issues of the 21st century. In this short story, we were introduced to Liza, who meets her father's mistress in her half-brother's funeral. The dish sinigang was used to make the readers see how happy Liza's family before her father decided to go with his mistress. What social issues can we see here? Looking at this article published in 2015, we see that the start of the 21st century in the Philippines likewise marked the increase of the number of annulment cases in our country. Okay, this graph, we see that from the year 2000 onwards, annulment cases have actually increased. Annulment, as we know it, may be due to several factors, but one of them should be and would always be unfaithfulness or infidelity. Of course, in a marital relationship, which is one of the issues presented in the short story that you would be able to read in the course of our sessions. If you are going to write a histobio paper about this story, you will make use of these kinds of information to explain the message, the true message of the story to the readers. Another approach that we can use is the cultural approach that allows us to look at the role of religions, ethnicities, traditions, customs, and beliefs in the creation and understanding of the text that we are reading. We use the knowledge of the culture to understand the choices of characters, the use of certain symbols, among others. Are you familiar with this Nickelodeon classic? Alright? If you're familiar with the title and if you know the title, kindly comment your answer on the comment box. We're gonna wait for your answers. Yes, alright. The title of this classical cartoon from Nickelodeon is Avatar: The Legend of Aang. In this cartoon series, we are informed that the world needs the Avatar, who is the one who can control the four elements to restore balance to the world. That is, to control the Fire Nation and Fire Lord Ozai in invading and destroying the world. As the Avatar, it is his destiny to stop and kill Fire Lord Ozai. But in the last episode entitled Sozin's Comet, Avatar Aang, we see that Aang had reservations in killing Ozai. Cultural approach to literature may begin here. We may ask the question, what cultural aspect affected Aang's decision? Going back to the story, we see that Aang decided to use the lion turtle's wisdom to take away Ozai's bending or fire bending instead of killing him. And why is that? Remember that Aang is a monk, which in the series highly represents the Buddhist monks or the Buddhist principles. In the five moral precepts of Buddhism, we understand that Buddhist monks are prohibited to do the following: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or partaking of intoxicants. You see, knowledge of the culture presented in this next series allowed us to better explain the decision of Ang as the character. Let us proceed with another literary approach. This time we have gender studies. Here we are encouraged to think about the purpose of the text based on how it presented the gender roles of men and women, gender inequality, women oppression, and other issues pertaining to gender. Let us have this movie as our basal text. Do you know the title of this movie? If you know, kindly comment your answers on our comment box. And are you likewise familiar with this character? If you know the answer, also comment your answer on the comment box. Alright. If your answer is Frozen and Elsa, then you are correct. Do you still remember the song popularized by Elsa? Let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. Alright, so I think that you can still remember that song. Okay, using gender studies, feminism in particular, we can say that Elsa is actually an embodiment of a free woman. Even though at first she was imprisoned to the idea of a perfect girl instilled by her father, she later on let everything go and started to live alone. Towards the end, we will also see that Disney has taken away the common notion of a girl in need of a man to be saved. In the end, it was actually Elsa, not a true love's kiss, nor a boyfriend who saved her sister from being frozen forever, her sister being Anna. We see here that a woman is always and will be the only one who can help another woman. Again, here we did not only look at the characters and the plot, we likewise uncovered the true message of the movie by using a particular literary approach. You can also use the Marxist approach in analyzing the literary texts. Here, we look at how the text represents the social class and the social alienation, most especially the oppression of the working class or the proletariat, and the materialism of the ruling class or the bourgeois. Basically, you will look at where the money and the power is. Let us look at the untitled poem by Jonathan Acabo about overseas Filipino workers. In his poem, we see why or who are the materialistic and the ones struggling to satisfy materialistic needs or the materialistic. Here, the persona sees the struggle of OFWs to provide for their families who, on the other end, think that these OFWs are millionaires. Clearly, the materialistic attitude of some Filipinos are exposed by this poem and, of course, using the Marxist approach. Aside from the previous approaches, we also have the psychological approach. This perspective allows us to analyze the text and the characters using the concepts of psychology. The critic thinks that the characters in the text may represent the three parts of the human personality. We have the id, the ego, and the superego. Character choices and symbols may also be used to explain the purpose of the text based on the psychological perspective. Can anyone guess the name of this movie? Alright, comment your answers in the comment box. I'd like to see some answers. If your answer is The Hunger Games, then you are correct. It presents the situation of the 12 districts sending two tributes every year to fight to death. We may see in this movie, or we may see this movie as a representation of the theories of personality by exploring the existence of evil, morality, and the one who mediates between these two. We may see President Snow, for example, the one who began and continued to promote this game as the id, Primrose as the superego for being the only one who'd like to help others, and Katniss as the ego who had several struggles in her decision-making scenarios. Now that you are acquainted to the various literary approaches, let us look at how we will use one of these literary approaches to write a critical essay. A critical essay, ladies and gentlemen, is an application of literary approach in interpreting literature. Using an approach, or one of the approaches that we have studied, you must answer this question. Why was this literary piece written in the first place? Okay, so remember that question. That should be the question that you must be able to answer as you write your critical essay about a piece of literature. In writing the essay, we must observe the following parts. The first one is the introduction, the body, and of course, the conclusion. To better understand the concept of writing a critical paper and also to know what is expected in each part of the essay, let us look at this paper by yours truly, entitled The World of Women, a Shield and a Weapon. This essay, or this is a critical essay, where the feminist approach was used to understand the play Trifles by Susan Glaspell. Trifles is actually a play about the murder of John Wright. The male characters in the play are sure that Mrs. Wright, John Wright's wife, is the murderer. The problem is that they are struggling to find the right evidences to support this idea. The women characters, on the other hand, see all possible evidences, but only these women can understand the connection of the crime and the strangled bird in the box. This is because men, as presented in the play, have no concern for what women do. Let us set aside the plot for a while and look at how the writer wrote the introduction of the essay. The introduction, my dear students, provides background information about the thesis statement and allows the readers to know the subject matter of the essay. You may use a rhetorical question and other ideas that make the readers be acquainted with the idea you'd like to discuss in your essay. Let us have this introduction from the essay. Let's read. For the last century, the patriarchal society deemed women as the fragile ones, incapable of having a living without a man by their side. Men created their own world, leaving their wives, daughters, and even sisters to things they perceive as petty household chores. Being excluded from the patriarchal world, women found their common place and were able to create a world only women could comprehend. In this introduction, we see the general idea of the patriarchal society and how it considers women in the first sentence. This is followed by a sentence that supports the idea presented in the first sentence. The third one here connects the patriarchal society and how women are forced to create a world only women can enter. Here, we see a sentence. It says, this concept of women's world is very evident in Susan Glaspell's Trifles. This sentence obviously connects the introductory ideas to the interpretation of Trifles. Before we discuss the next sentence, or the last sentence that you can see there in the introduction, let us talk about the thesis statement. The thesis statement tells the readers that the central point of the essay summarizes the things that will be discussed in the essay, provides the writer with a parameter or boundary, and lastly signals what the essay will be about. It is basically a sentence that points out the message that the writer would like to discuss in the essay. All right, so here we see that the thesis statement says that the world of women is actually a weapon and a shield. This is basically the main message that the writer would like to show the readers. That restricting women from the patriarchal world forced them to create a world that, in the context of the play, became even more detrimental to the patriarchal world. Since it presented two subtopics connected to the main topic, which is the world of women, there would be two paragraphs in the body of the essay. Remember, there will be two since there are two subtopics involved. The first one would have a topic sentence and supporting sentences focused on the world of women as a shield, while the other one, the other paragraph, would focus on the world of women as a weapon. Now that we understood how should we write the introduction and the thesis statements, Let us proceed with the body of the essay. As you can see here on your right, the number of paragraphs in the body must be consistent with the number of ideas presented in the thesis statement. Note that you have to use cohesive devices to link the sentences and, of course, the paragraphs. Let us look at our thesis statement again. Okay? Remember that there must be two paragraphs since there are 2 points here. Women's world as a shield and also as a weapon. Okay, let me read it again for you. Glassfalls Trifalls reveals that the world of women, as represented by the household chores, serves as both a weapon and a shield detrimental enough to harm a man, inflicting restraint and maltreatment to a woman. All right, so let's have the first paragraph of our body. This would be the first paragraph. As revealed in Trifles, women were seen in the society as individuals behind a clean kitchen, living room, and even a tidy barn. Women were likewise limited to sewing, the only leisure married women enjoyed. Single ladies, as compared to these kinds of women, are more liberated and are able to pursue anything they want. This claim is evidenced by Mrs. Hale's words that revealed Mrs. Wright as very lively and beautiful Minnie Foster before. After being married to John Wright, however, she became locked to the world where washing the dishes and cleaning the barn is not a choice, but a duty. Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters are very familiar with this kind of world, for they can sympathize with the situation Mrs. Wright experienced just before John's death. Mrs. Wright's experience of being a wife, however, was much more tiring, for she likewise has a farm to maintain. Mrs. Hale even said that Mrs. Wright's situation never seemed a very cheerful place. Deemed as exhausting and boring, men considered this world of women as something trivial, if not blunt. Women, however, found their access mundi in this world. Though household chores, or through household chores, they relate to fellow women and their sentiments. This world, however, accepts only women and perhaps those who experience the same thing. This is evidenced by men's inability to perceive the bird and the quilt as evidences to Mrs. Wright's crime. Hale, the county attorney, and the sheriff all exerted a lot of effort finding the evidence that is reasonable in their own shared world, not knowing that the most powerful evidence could only be found in the world only Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Wright could understand and enter. As a result, the accusation directed towards Mrs. Wright could not be deemed as reasonable. Women's world, therefore, shielded Mrs. Wright from being harmed once again by men and their cruel world. Note that the highlighted sentence in this paragraph is actually the topic sentence that talks about women's world as a shield. And all sentences preceding or at the top of these topic sentence are the supporting sentences to the topic. Let us have the next paragraph. All right, this time, remember, we're talking about women's world as, all right, yeah, you're correct, as a weapon. Okay, because in the previous paragraph, we talk about women's world as a shield. Now, let's have women's world as a weapon. Though the story doesn't directly say that John Wright beats his wife, one could infer from the words of Mrs. Hale that John indeed abuses Minnie Foster. He was a hard man. This line clearly states that just before Mrs. Wright decided to kill John, she was already harassed by her own husband. Aside from this, John somehow restricted Minnie Foster from singing once again after the marriage. Mrs. Hale even said that she used to sing, but he killed that too. These lines were even more reinforced by the image of the dead bird in the play. It's a symbolism for the death of Mrs. Wright's freedom brought about by John's restriction. Despite these things, one would assume that she continued to live her life as a housewife, married not to her husband, but to the household chores, a metaphor to women's world. Deprived and restricted, Mrs. Wright used the world of women to kill her own husband. It is interesting to note, however, that even though there's a gun in the house, Mrs. Wright decided to use rope to strangle her husband to death. This may be because, or is maybe because of the gun symbol to her, a symbol of a man's world. More than this, the author might have known that using a phallic symbol as a tool for women won't make the play in favor of the feminine side, thus making Mrs. Wright ignore the gun and rely on what the women's world could offer her. And so, she patterned the crime's plot to one household chore, and that is sewing. At the end, it was women's world that destroyed the hard man she endured all her life as a married woman. Note here that the highlighted sentence again is the topic sentence of the second paragraph, which talks about the women's world as a weapon. Again, the preceding sentences have all supported, and I think you would agree with me, supported the topic sentence. Now that we have covered the body already, let us proceed with the conclusion. It summarizes, remember that this summarizes the discussion and reaffirms the thesis statement. It likewise answers the introduction or what the introduction says it will do and relates with the ideas written in the introduction. So basically, it's just a restatement of what you have already said in the introduction. Let us see how it is done. Okay, let's look up here. Okay, everyone, are you still with me? All right, so if you're still with me, kindly click the heart button. All right, so let's look here. The society, being patriarchal in nature, continues to deprive women just like what it did for the last century. Nevertheless, confinement to a stereotyped world did not make them weak. Women's world, which in the play was represented by household chores and or that made women bounded and strengthened, all right, it's something that could not be penetrated by men in the patriarchal world. More than strengthening women, however, is its provision, the world of women's provision for protection and even as a weapon for a woman to defend herself. Here, we see the reiteration of the patriarchal world and its provision to exclude women. Aside from this, the essay has ended with the restatement of the thesis statement, which tells us that even though that's the case, even though the patriarchal society have excluded women, women were able to create a world which in the play of Glasskull is used by women both as a shield and also as a weapon. I hope that you would also explore the learning packets or the information presented on the learning packets to better understand how an essay is written. There are several information there, and it would be to waste if we would not read them. Now, let us have a recap of the things that we have discussed. All right? So let's have a recap by asking ourselves the following questions. First question, can you define critical interpretation of literature? All right, so the first question would be define critical interpretation of literature. Write your answers on the comment box. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to answer. If your answer is related with the use of literary approaches in interpreting literature, then you are correct. Also, we talked about a while ago the ways of thinking about the text. All right, then just looking at the pieces of facts and information on the text. Next question, what are the various literary approaches that we have discussed? All right, comment your answers on the comment box. All right, you are correct if you have answered the following. We have the historical biographical approach, cultural approach, gender studies approach, psychological approach, Marxist approach, and of course, other approaches that you can think of that you know, all right, before. Okay, I think that we can consider all of them in this particular question. Let's have the third question. Can you enumerate the 3 parts of the essay? All right, comment down your answers. All right. We have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Correct. Lastly, what do you think is the role of the thesis statement in the critical essay? Remember that this is the most important a part of the essay. All right, this is also the last sentence of the introduction. Remember that the introduction says everything, every particular idea that the reader must know about the essay, and the thesis statement is very important there. All right, so kindly write your answers on the comment box. Correct. It is used to present to the readers the central point of the essay or the central idea you want to discuss in the essay. Now, I hope that the next time you play Put a Finger Down on perspectives in essay writing, you won't have to always put your finger down. Remember that literature can be read in a variety of ways, okay? And there must be always be a way of documenting the things or these kinds of ideas, and you must be able to write them in a piece of writing, which in this case is a critical essay. Do not let those ideas go and escape from your mind. It's better to write them down in an essay form.